And so tonight, I'm pleased to welcome acclaimed novelist and journalist Carl Hiaasen to present his newest book, Star Island. Many of us find our daily news filled with reports of what film star passed out where, who's earning $1 million for doing nothing, and how fast it is all spiraling downward. As much as we may love these guilty pleasures, there is a need for satire to take them down a rung, and Carl Hiaasen is just the author to do it. Along with the usual lineup of colorful and sometimes repugnant characters, we meet Cherry, a vapid pop star who causes a wake of booze-fueled destruction all within the Florida state lines. Of Star Island, the LA Times writes, "Over the whole frenzied, decadent scene, Hiaasen broods like God, weighing guilt, calibrating punishments, and Hiaasen's secret is his gift for precise and voluminous specifics. In the opening chapter, for instance, Cherry has swallowed an unwise mix of vodka, Red Bull, hydrocodone, birdseed, and stool softener." Scene after scene, Hiaasen keeps up this kind of antic embroidery, proving not only that God may be in the details, but also that comedy most certainly is. A Florida native, Mr. Hiaasen has a degree in journalism from University of Florida and has been an active investigative journalist for many years. His unique novels have been described as environmental thrillers and are published in over 33 languages. Past works include Tourist Season, Striptease, Lucky You, and children's titles Hoot, Flush, and Scat. He currently writes a weekly column for the Miami Herald and continues to advocate for the preservation of his home state. We are thrilled to have him with us this evening, so will you please join me in welcoming Carl Hiaasen.
I don't usually get invited to venues like this. This is very overwhelming. I'm happy to be here. I've been watching the news today. Lindsay's out. I was watching CNN before I came over, and they said, stay tuned for the big debate. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe Afghanistan, maybe monetary policy. It's no, the debate was between experts on whether or not Lindsay will go back to jail soon. Yeah. So anyway, I started working on this book a couple years ago, probably more in my head than any other thing. Just my background as a news reporter, and I've been a columnist for many, many years for the Miami Herald. And I still sort of cling to this old-fashioned belief that in the shrinking world of news, where news space and newspapers is vanishing, where television is devoting less and less time to authentic news, that it ought to be, the space ought to be reserved for something truly important. And the only segment of our business, of the news business, that's expanded in the last 10 years is so-called celebrity journalism, this incredible drooling appetite for every piece of information possible about people we really shouldn't worry too much about. Honestly, I don't know about lying awake at night worrying about Mel Gibson's marriage. I don't know that anyone, man. I began to get worried when I started looking into it. I have to do a minimal amount of research on the novels usually because I'm writing in a place that I was born and raised in. I know pretty well Florida. And this book was going to be set in South Beach, which is the sort of this epicenter of pretension and vanity and self-absorption and empty-headedness. And it's a perfectly silly place. And somehow, as a satirist, you've got to make it even sillier. And that's hard to do. So I started having the Herald has like an entertainment column, gossip column, whatever, and it's online as well as in the paper. So I started reading this. And as I'm reading, I discovered this entity, and I wasn't sure, is it a singular entity or multiple entity, called the Kardashian sisters. And this is the beginning of the sordid phase of my research. And to this day, I don't know how many of them there are. They appear to be enough to field maybe a soccer team or a football team at least. And a great deal of ink and attention in our newspaper was spent on the comings and goings of these people. And I realized that this was going to be just a very depressing book for me to write, because how to stay ahead of the curve, and this is the challenge to make, if you're writing satire, is to crank it up a notch, to take reality and twist it a little bit, and especially if you're making fun and you're holding it up for ridicule, presumably, and then events always seemed to surpass whatever I had invented. In this novel, in Star Island, there's this just delaminated young singer whose real name is Cheryl Gale Bunterman, but her mother has renamed her Cherry Pie, thus presenting her to the world as this adorable little tramp at about age 14. So now she's 22. She's on another comeback. You know how the cycle goes. You know what the narrative is: the crash, burn, comeback, all carefully choreographed. And she's got a big tour coming up, and she's got a CD coming out, and she's frantically trying to learn the words to the songs that she hasn't really written, not for purposes of singing, but the lip syncing, which in itself, in this day and age, is an incredible talent. Milli Vanilli was nothing compared to what goes on right now. So anyway, she's just in such bad shape most of the time that they feel the need to hire an actress who looks like her, just to send her out on little forays into the public, just enough so the paparazzi can get a shot or two, so to give the illusion that Cherry is ambulatory most of the time. And it's carefully part of the image that they're trying to construct for her. And so they hire an actress to do this, and the actress is sort of the heroine of this novel. Her name is Anne Delusia, and I like her tremendously. She's the intellectual antithesis of Cherry. And I've been in a lot of interviews over the last couple of weeks on the book, and they always ask, they always make the comment that Cherry, God, she's really stupid, isn't she? And I said, this is going to come as a shock to you, and it may not sound politically correct, but there are some really stupid people in the world. And I'm not going to discriminate in my novels by keeping them out. They're going to appear in my novels just as they do in your life every single day. You know this, whatever line of work you're in, you've got some brilliant people, you've got some pretty smart people, and you've got some people who are as dumb as a box of rocks. And this is true in show business, having known and interviewed over the years some cross-section of so-called celebrities. Some of them are charming and bright and witty and everything you'd hope they would be, and others you just stare at them and there really is, you look into their eyes and there's nothing going on. There's just nothing. They're just these amiable dunces, and that's okay. That's okay too. So that's Cherry. She just bumbles through this stardom. There's a line in the book saying that she wasn't, she was not equipped for anything else but being a celebrity. That's it. She has no other survival skills. If this were 5,000 years ago, this poor girl is is part of the herd that would have been picked off by the saber-toothed tigers in the general culling of the species back when such things happened. Now we don't have that going on, and so they exist among us. In the state of Florida, many of them run for public office, and they make my life much easier. But anyway, so there's Cherry and there's Anne, and then it's sort of the evil center, if evil is the right word. I've been dying for years to put a paparazzo in one of the novels. I mean, I'm just amazed. Coming from a journalism background, when we were sent out on assignments off the news desk and you had a photographer with you, it was almost like a combat deal. You were in Miami, especially with the crime and the violence and we had riots and all kinds of things going on. I mean, we always felt that our goal was out there getting news that we were going to put in the paper that somebody would find useful. Something was happening in somebody's neighborhood, and those folks would want to know what it was, and we were doing what seemed to be a noble thing. And from that, you sort of slide into the area of the predatory journalism, where how do you go from that kind of life to like hiding out in Sandra Bullock's shrubbery for 24 hours at a time? And that's what they do. And it's quite a lifestyle. And so from a novelist's point of view, I don't really know any of these guys well enough. But you have to use your imagination and try to get into. In this novel, the paparazzo is a guy named Bang Abbott, and he's sort of a defrocked journalist. He had won the Pulitzer Prize for photography under extremely dicey circumstances. There was a shark attack in Florida that he just happened to have all his tripods set up for, and a bucket of chum that he'd thrown into the water a little earlier. So he left the St. Petersburg Times under a cloud. But he transitioned seamlessly into this world where of just stalking the famous, the semi-famous, the wannabe famous, and you know, the daycare center stakeout, which I have a little bit in the book about the idea of hanging out at the daycare center so some movie star can bring their kids in, you know, little toddlers, and you surprise the family. This goes on all the time, and it's about as low. It's about as bad as it gets. I mean, what do you do with people like that? Well, in my case, I can stick them in a novel and something really hideous happens to them. And I got to say, it feels great. You just, what am I going to do to this guy? And you think and think as the pages unfold and he gets more and more despicable that something really grand is going to happen at the end to him. A life-changing event will happen to him by the end of it. This is not, I guess this is a sort of a literary insight. I mean, it's not like a grand, you know, scheming plan. I just know that he's not gonna walk off in one piece at the end of the story. And I've only had one experience with the paparazzi in my life, because novelists are the dullest people you're ever going to meet. And the public has no interest, rightfully so, in what we do, or if it's the twittering. I can't even imagine. My mom wouldn't even look in on my Twitter account. She couldn't give a rat's ass what I'm eating for breakfast, you know, honestly. I can't imagine anybody else would. So, but one experience was I had a book that was turned into a movie. The book was called Striptease, and Burt Reynolds was in it, and Demi Moore was in it a few years ago. And once they wrapped, and I had very little to do, let me just put this right out there, with the movie. Everyone was very nice on the set. They were as nice as they could be. I signed some books for the cast and the crew, but I had nothing to do. But I did get that call that every author dreads if you have a movie being made of one of your books, and the director calls up and you say, well, how's it going? They say, we're going to have to reshoot the ending. That's code for like dead on arrival right there. It's like, oh, reshoot the ending. So it means that it's not going to resemble very much the ending of your book. In any case, so the movie, I'm being a good soldier, a good trooper. The check cleared. I was feeling pretty good. They said, you want to come to New York for the premiere of the movie. Okay, good. So they said it's at the Ziegfeld in New York. Oh, wow. So I'm there, and there's just this mob of photographers, and they're waiting for Demi, who was going to come. She was still married to Bruce Willis at the time, and they were going to bring their kids, and then Burt was going to be there, and this wonderful actress who was in the movie playing an exotic dancer, whose name was Pandora Peaks. Ay. So there's a big party, and at the party these guys are, and I'm photographed, and Pandora moves over in her own way and wants to have her photograph. So I've got a drink in my hand, and she's standing here, and my eyes are not where they should be for this photograph. Anyway, so getting back to the Ziegfeld, this is absolutely true. So they say, okay, you're going to walk about 10 steps, you turn, you look at the photographers, and they're all going to take your picture, and then you walk another 10 steps for the next little nest of these weasels, and you do the same thing, and you walk another 10 steps, and that's what you do. I'm being a good soldier. I do 10 steps, flash, get to the last station of the cross, as it were, and I'm third step, and then I'll wave, and then simultaneously from the crowd of photographers, 4 or 5 of them shout, "Who are you?" and that's right away and I deserved it, because I had no business being there. But that was my exposure to and not one of them followed me home or did anything else. There's a couple characters that I should talk about a little bit, because they return from other novels. The first one I've never brought back before. He was in a novel called Skin Tight, which I wrote, I think it came out in 1989. He was the reason I brought him back is because he was working on South Beach in the novel as a bouncer. He's about 7 feet tall, never played basketball. This is a thing that's haunted him his whole life, and he tends to kill people who ask him, what team do you play for? He was a victim of a bizarre electrolysis accident when he was young, so he's got some complexion issues. And in the course of he was a bouncer at a punk club in that novel, but he was an aspiring hitman. You know, he came to Florida like everybody else with a dream. And so during the course of that novel, again, he was not a nice guy, and something bad had to happen to him. So I have him, he falls off a stilt house, or jumps off a stilt house in Biscayne Bay, and his arm is taken off by a big barracuda. And he doesn't die, but he still wants his gig at the punk club. He doesn't want to lose his job as a bouncer. So he opts for a very unusual prosthesis. It's a weed whacker that he has attached to his arm, surgically attached to his arm. And I researched that a lot because I went to this plastic surgeon that I knew, and I said, look, I don't care if it's plausible or not. I want to know if it's possible. If I lost my arm about here, and I wanted a weed whacker on my arm, could you do it for me? And he thought about it and just did some sketching, little things. He said, yeah, I think I'll put the battery, we'll hang the battery here. He got all excited. He thought, So I said, that's all I need to know. If it's possible, I'll do it. So his name is Chemo, this character, and Chemo's got a weed whacker. So I bring him back in this novel. At the end of Skin Tight, he goes off to Florida prison for about 17, 18 years for a second-degree homicide and second-degree murder. And he's allowed to keep his prosthesis. They just put him in the garden at the prison, and he gets to work. Why not? So I did the math. I figured he's out now. It's about time to bring him back. So I bring him back into this plot at Star Island as he's brought in as Cherry's bodyguard. Now, one of the many problems they're having with her is her not just her disobedience of her bodyguards, but her inclination to sleep with her bodyguards. So her handlers get together, her parents, her stage managing parents, there's these twin publicists, there's her manager, all of them sit down at a table and say, I think it would be best if we've got a bodyguard that she wouldn't under any circumstance sleep with. Someone who would just be so repulsive that even she would not sleep with him. So Chemo was selected on the basis of his unattractiveness and general homicidal demeanor. But still she tries. But even Chemo, after 17 years in the slammer, he still has his standards, and he still stays strong. But anyway, so he's in the mix. He was also, because South Beach has changed a lot since I wrote the first book, and I thought that it would be fun kind of to turn him loose on some of the nonsense on South Beach. I mean, he doesn't really get a whack at the Kardashians, but it crossed my mind. But then the lawyers said maybe not. So, and then the other character I bring back is this kind of ragged old ex-governor of Florida who's been living in the woods for Skink. I had to be careful when I bring him out. There's just got to be the right moment. And so Skink is down, and there's a real place in North Key Largo called the Crocodile Lakes Wildlife Refuge. It's a lake's full of crocodiles, actually, and that's where he's hanging out. And he runs into Anne by chance. There's an automobile accident, and he sort of pulls her out of the wreckage of the car. Anne, being the actress, she was on her way for a couple of days in R&R. And Skink is one of these guys, he's just always looking for the one pure soul, the one true soul, not even in a romantic way, just in a sense that he's so jaded, and he's been sort of, he's really just sort of clinging to reality in his own way. But he meets her, and immediately, it's a very brief encounter, but he becomes very fond of her, and she's smart, and she's funny, and he says, if you ever need anything, call me. And so she does. She gets in trouble. The paparazzo in Miami Beach, up in South Beach, grabs her by accident, thinking she's Cherry, and it makes him crazy too. And she makes the one phone call to Skink, so he goes up on South Beach, and that was my dream, was turning him loose too, because I thought this is just too good to be true. In one of the novels, I have him eating somebody's dog, and this time he's mellowed a little bit. There's a dog incident, but he reflects on it before he dines on the dog, that it isn't really the dog's fault, it's really the owner's fault. So maybe I've mellowed in that sense a little bit. But you know, and no offense to any of you who have dogs like this, but in a few of my novels, this is a recurring theme. I have this belief that if you have to bend down and pet your dog, it's not really a dog. If you have to go find, if you really literally, have you seen the dog? You don't have a dog. If you got a dog, you know where he is. And so these are these little, you know, they're like it's like you know, like a gerbil mated with a wolverine or something. What the fuck is that? Anyway. So bad stuff happens to those dogs in the book. But and then I'll end with this one story. This is my big Hollywood story during Striptease. At one point, I was sent to John Kennedy Jr. was alive at the time. He had his magazine, George Magazine, political magazine, and he was putting to me on the cover as Martha Washington the same month that the movie was coming out. And he called me. Trust me, I'd just gotten divorced. I'm living alone in the Keys in this little house. I don't get a lot of calls from guys like John Kennedy Jr. I get calls from like lawyers. And so he leaves a message, call me up. I talk to him. He's a nice guy. Can you just fly to L.A.? We're doing this photo shoot. We're making her up as Martha Washington. Just do a cute little interview that we can throw in there into the magazine so we can justify the picture on the cover of her. And I said, all right. He talks me into it. I go out there. And I'm supposed to interview her while she's getting made up. She has like 9 people working on her. She has a body makeup person, face makeup, hair. Every part of her had somebody working on it. And she's waving to me, I'll be with you soon. This goes on for hours. I'm getting really pissed off. I'm missing a good fishing trip. I was supposed to be in North Carolina. I don't have the right attitude, you know. So she comes over, and she can be fairly charming, and said, here, I want you to take the car and go out to Malibu and hang with Bruce. He's not doing anything. I'll be done soon. Go out there and have lunch with Bruce. Yeah, sure, why not? So I get it, and her car is waiting outside, and there's some guy, you know, and he drives me out there, and there's Bruce, as nice as he can be. He's on the phone. I'm hanging with Bruce. Now, what am I doing out here in Malibu with you know? I want to just go fishing. She says, she'll be done soon. She tells me this. And then all of a sudden he's looking around and goes, have you seen the dogs? I said, I haven't seen any dogs. She goes, she's got these 2 little dogs. And if they get out on the beach, in Malibu, I guess everybody runs their big dogs out there. He says, those dogs will get eaten by a big dog out there. Now she loves those damn dogs. You got to help me find the dogs. So now me, skinny writer and big screen action star, are out on the beach trying to herd these 2 little rat dogs up before some sort of, you know, bull mastiff eats one of them as an hors d'oeuvre. It's my big Hollywood experience. Anyway, so we gather the dogs up, we get the dogs in, very heroic. I go back to the photo studio. She's still not done. They say, well, we're glad you're here. John called. He wants you to take a picture with Demi. Okay. And what kind? He's going to run a little picture in the editor's note, you and Demi. I got literally a T-shirt and jeans on because I was on my way to go fishing. And I said, well, sure. And they said, no, not like that. They said to me, what size do you wear in Armani? I didn't know who the hell Armani was. What size do you wear? I work for a newspaper. What size do I wear? Brooks Brothers? I could tell you. Armani? No, I can't tell you. Anyway, they bring some. I know exactly what size he wears, and they bring this truck, a van, full of these expensive suits. They put one on me. It is about 10 sizes too big. They have to pin me up from the neck to my ass with these giant pins. So now that I look, and they said, here's the deal. Demi's out there. There's going to be an X on the setup where the photographer's set up, she's set up, and you go out there and you stand on the X, you get your picture taken, and you step out of the frame immediately because, and I said, why? She goes, because she's already lit. And I said, I wish I was already lit. Can that be arranged? So they hustle me out there like a prop, and there she is, and she's radiant. Here's the other thing they didn't tell me was this rendition of Martha Washington was Martha Washington without a top on. Now, I had studied history, and I'd seen a lot of the old lithographic reproductions of the colonial. I'd never seen a picture of Martha topless before, as far as maybe it was accurate. But anyway, what they had done was that they had painted her red, white, and blue up here and put a little shawl over there. So it wasn't like this kind, but clearly there was nothing. And so again, my eyes are screwed. I'm into the scene again. And she's smiling, and she's not moving. She's lit. There's no question. The light is just where she wants it. And so they shoved me into the thing. And, I have to say, I'm just pissed off at the world at this point. And so they said, fold your arms. And they said, smile. And they said, you're not smiling. And I said, no, shit, I'm not smiling. Why do you think I'm not smiling? I want to be fishing. So anyway, we're trying to get this arranged. And then to me, to her credit, she reaches her hand over. And I'm sitting there, and she just tickles me right in the middle of it. So I laugh. They take the picture, and his hand fucking grabs my shoulder, yanks me back, and I'm waving. Good to me, he's waving. I'm waving. Off we go. They throw me backstage, and they put me in this place, and they said, get out of the suit. And so I start getting out of the suit, and I hear a voice say, don't get any makeup on it. We got to take that back to Rodeo Drive. That was and goodbye, Mr. Author. Goodbye. All I had done was write the book. Why would they be nice to me out there? And that was it. So that was my brush with I haven't been asked back either, but anyway, that's it. So that's my sort of stardom experience, and it's luckily limited. And I would like to take they said about 30 minutes of questions, and they're going to boot me out of here. So I wanted to do that before we got too far along. What's on my bedside? I thought you wanted the prescriptions. No. There's a book right now that I'm going to start when I get home called Matterhorn, which is a novel about Vietnam, which I'm going to read. It's a little heavy, both physically and psychically, for airplane travel during a book tour, but that's something I'm going to read. I have a lot of galleys, books that haven't been published yet, that sort of I have to go through, and I don't even remember the names of them all, and some of them I'll read and some of them I won't. I have a test. I get sent so much stuff, and it's nice to be sent, but some of it it's good and some of it's not so good. But I don't ever read the first chapter, ever, when I get a galley or a manuscript. I turn to the middle of the book, and I read a couple pages, and I know right away if the writing is good enough or not. The writing is good enough for me to want to read the whole book. Everybody can write a good first chapter. It's been edited 50,000 times, but in the middle of the book, the tough slogging, if that writing still has energy, if it's still moving and I like it, then I'll go back and start again. That's what I do. Not anymore. In the old days, they did. The question was, do all the books get optioned as movies? Not all of them so much. Hollywood has sort of changed. There's a lot more emphasis on blockbuster sequels and on animated features. And then generally aren't buying as many novels. My novels in particular are very tricky. A lot of the humor is in the narrative tone of the book, and it's tough to put it up on the screen without a narrator. But I think, if I had my way, it would be, I would love to get, the Coen brothers briefly were involved in Skinny Dip, which would have been great. But you can't get your hopes up about it. In the old days, everything was like this would get optioned. And it was the best of both worlds, because 90% of the time, the best thing is to get that option check every 18 months and never have the movie made. Because then you never have to explain it to people. But I remember there was a book, the second book I did, the first book where Skink appeared is called Double Whammy, and it's this novel about sex and murder and corruption on the professional bass fishing tour. I know. It's territory I have completely to myself to this day. When Updike passed away last year, I can't believe he didn't do his bass fishing book. Mailer the same way. He never got to the bass fishing book. So anyway, there's a really grotesque scene in that novel that I was extremely proud of. At the time I wrote it, I always try to be topical. Pit bull dogs were all over South Florida. Every scoundrel and criminal had a pit bull dog, and they were always attacking innocent people. And it was like there was a law, I think, that every trailer park had to have 2 or 3 free-running pit bull dogs in it. So I wanted a pit bull dog in that movie, and I wanted the ultimate pit bull attack. So there's a bad guy breaking into a trailer, and the pit bull comes rushing out of the shadows and bites him on the arm, and there's a big wrestling match, and he stabs the dog with a screwdriver and kills him. But the dog doesn't let go. He stays on the arm. He stays on that arm for about 104 pages, if my memory is right. And he develops a relationship with this dead dog. He becomes slightly delirious. He names the dog Lucas, and he's driving through the Turnpike toll plaza, and he makes the attendant pet the dog's head, you know. And it was very tastefully done. But that book gets optioned by Paramount, and I'm saying the first thing that's going to go is Lucas. He's going to go. First draft of the script comes in. I'm out of my mind, ecstatic, because there's the dead pit bull dog, and the studio loves it, which is another, code word for death, and so they said, well, we just want Jimmy to take another pass, the screenwriter take another pass at it. So sure enough, the next pass, there's no sign of the dog, there's no reference of it, not even close. He was gone. Some executive read it and probably keeled over in his Cheerios, and that was the end of that, the pit bull thing. But that was, and I'll tell you a funny story. I was at a book signing. This is a very strange world, and I love my fans. But I'm at a book signing, and this was at, I think outside of Denver, maybe Boulder, Colorado, somewhere like that. And there's a very nice woman about my mom's age in line, and she's coming up, and she says, "I love your books," and I sign a book. I've read all your books, and she leans over, just whisper in my ear, and she says to me, I swear, she says, "I named my tumor after Lucas." And she pulls up her sleeve, and there's this jagged surgical scar the length of her arm. Now, I don't know how to respond to this. I'm just completely, there's nothing in Emily Post that tells you how to respond to that statement. I named my tumor after Lucas. I suppose as a writer you're flattered at some sick level, but all I could say to her, she's waving, just like my mom. I'm going, holy crap. She's waving sweetly, and then she goes, and I said, all I could squeak out was, is everything okay now? She goes, I'm fine, sweetie. I'm just fine. I had Lucas taken out. And off she goes. Just like another day, I'm going, oh, this is my fan base. Good. How do I come up with the names? That's a good one. When I was a kid, I read a lot, and one of the things that used to really piss me off was I'd be reading a book, and it'd be a long book, and by page 150, there would be a reference to a character early in the novel, and I couldn't place the name. The name meant nothing to me, and I'd have to go back and who was this character, and you needed a directory to find and I thought, when I write my characters, I want the name to stick visually on the page and have something to do with the nature of the character, the actress in this book, Anne DeLucia. Once you meet her, you're never going to forget that's who it is. I think a lot about the names. I do think it's important. I just hated to be, maybe I was just dumb as a kid, but I got confused, and I go, what is this? And, you're reading, I mean, with all due credit to Dostoevsky, holy God. The last book tour I was on, I punish myself on book tours. I really try to see how bad the experience can be. So towards the end of the tour, to cheer myself up, I read Crime and Punishment. That was going to be my upbeat reading on the book tour. But again, I'm like, maybe I'm getting senile, but I'm going back, okay, who is this one now? I've lost track of all of them. And so I just want my characters to be so vivid upon first presentation that the name sticks with the image, and it also says something about them. I work a lot on that, and I'll change the names a lot. I'll fiddle with the names. Something's flat. Now with the miracle of, having learned to use some of the computer programs, if there's a character whose name I don't like, I can change it with one tap of the key. And I do that sometimes. I do. If it doesn't sound right, or a lawyer calls and says, I'm going to use that now. I'm not going to do that. How has Miami changed? And for the first question is, which of my books is my favorite? And the second is, how has Miami changed? I'll answer I don't have a favorite book. It really is, and it's not. I know it sounds corny, but it is like asking somebody which of your kids do you love the best, or not like the best. I have relationships with all the novels that over the years changed, because they're written at such different parts of your life that I don't associate the novel itself. It's hard to think of the novel itself as a piece of work without thinking of whatever was going on in my life at the time. So I have fonder memories of some novels than others. I think Tourist Season was exciting for me because it was the first book that I had written by myself. I'd written some others, collaborated on some, that I put my own name on. And the idea of getting it published, getting a novel published about a band of terrorists who are killing off tourists, you know, it was sort of, at the time, a little bit seditious, especially in South Florida. The Chamber of Commerce wasn't crazy about the book. So that, I mean, I always felt like if I could get away with that book, I could do a lot of other things. How Miami has changed, I mean, it's just tremendous upheaval. I started working there I was born in Fort Lauderdale, but I started working at the Herald in 1976, so there's been tremendous change. You had the Mariel boat lift, you had the hurricanes, you had everything else. I mean, it's not, believe it or not, it's not as violent today. We went through the cocaine wars in the late 70s and the early 80s that were pretty spectacular, and terrifying at the same time. You know, I think it's a big, active city that is, you know, I'm not really a city person. You know, I mean, I truly would rather be in the Everglades than be anywhere near South Beach. I mean, to me, I would much rather be surrounded by water moccasins than to be standing on Ocean Drive and have the cast of Jersey Shore up here. Honest to God, I would much rather have a water moccasin attached to some personal part of my body than to have to deal one-on-one with somebody named Snooky. No thanks. You know, and they often do about villains. Bang Abbott, I wouldn't use sympathetic. I would use the fact that I began to understand him more as I developed him more as a character. I mean, he is what he is, and there's part of him likable because he completely has no shame whatsoever. He doesn't labor under any illusions about what he does. He's a mercenary. He's a stalker. There's a scene in the book where he's waiting for cherry pie, and he gets a call from one of the tabloids to say, look, there's this Catholic priest in Miami that's having this torrid affair. We need you to get a picture of him with his mistress. It was a foreign tabloid. This is true, but it was based on a real case down there. There was a priest that was having this, you know, hot affair, and some of the Italian tabloids, because of all the controversy in the church, and the photographers were chasing this priest around, which was kind of funny. But so Bang Abbott, who is a little overweight, and he frankly is a repulsive physically in many ways, and he's not even shy about that. He admits that he's kind of a pig. So there's a scene where he's in a tree overlooking the rectory of the Catholic Church, just waiting for this priest to come out, and he's sitting up in a tree kind of mulling about his sorry state of life when he would much rather be chasing celebrities. And a nun comes out, and a couple of nuns are walking across the courtyard, and one of them turns and flips him the finger. And that's sort of something. Then you say, oh, poor Bang. That's really bad if you're getting flipped off by a nun. And I say that my aunt was a nun. I can talk like this. My uncle was a priest. We have these conversations. But anyway, but you know, what you do, I think, is I try to come to a little bit better understanding. It was like with Chemo in Skin Tight. I had this moment, well, do I kill him off? And I decided not to. I began to feel sorry for a 7-foot guy who'd never played basketball. It's got to be horrible to live in America with that burden. And after that book was done, I got a nice note from Elmore Leonard, who said he'd read the book, and he said, I'm so glad you didn't kill Chemo off. I really liked him. And it was sort of the same thing. Yeah. The Skin Tight was never made into a movie. Well, have you seen the movie? God, Jesus, I gotta make a call if you have. Striptease, what did I think of the movie? Wow. Andy Bergman is a great director and a great screenwriter, and I think what happens is when you sign on a star like Demi Moore, at that time she'd been paid more than any female actress had ever been paid. It was $8 million, and this is in 1995, 96. And that little number leaked out very early on, and it just sort of put a bullseye on the whole production, because for $8 million, you better be Lady Macbeth. And you know, I think it became a different kind of creature after that, and they really did sort of turn the movie around about her. And then in the novel, one of the characters was this bouncer at this strip club, and he was, to me, one of the strongest characters. And Ving Rhames played him in the movie. Ving had actually read the book and sort of taken it apart. He knew, I mean, I had a great conversation with him, but it was at that point it kind of became all about her. And I'll never forget, we had dinner one night, and the first cut of the movie had been done, and I hadn't seen it, and I hadn't been invited to see it, and I hadn't asked. And she said, well, yeah, it's okay. She goes, but I got to talk to Andy. I think there needs to be more dancing. And man, I said, more dancing. Okay. The idea was that everybody in America would line up at least every man in America would line up to see her on a pole dancing. With no clothes on. That was the idea. That's how that really wasn't any thematic reflection of the plot at all. There wasn't that much dancing in the book. So, but what am I going to do? Is stand up and say, "Oh no, nobody wants to see her naked." Yeah, let's change the whole movie around. Anyway, so. I mean, there were scenes that were funny. I will tell you the one scene, because there was some really sick stuff in that book, and I knew that some of it would have trouble getting on there. There's a scene, The Crooked Congressman, which was modeled after one of my own congressmen in Fort Lauderdale who'd gotten arrested in a strip joint. The character who Burt Reynolds plays, David Dilbeck, and there's a scene in the book where he has gotten completely infatuated with the character of Aaron, who is the dancer. And he's so infatuated. This is so perverse. I don't want to offend any of you, but I'll just tell you how sick it was. He's so perverse that he sends one of his aides to the laundromat, after she's been to the laundromat with her little kid, to get the lint out of the dryer, and he's sleeping with the lint. And they kept that scene in the movie, and I'll always be grateful. It's like my Rosebud moment, the lint scene stayed in. I don't think my mom ever saw the movie, and I'm praying she didn't read the book. Well, the observation was that all the kids' books have one-word titles, and the adult, grown-up novels have two-word titles. The publisher just always has preferred to have the fewer words on the jacket, the more they can do with the art. The art department can do a lot more with the jacket. And back when I started, I was happy to have my name as small as it could be, as long as the title was big enough and there was something cool looking on the jacket. So once the book started doing well, they said, well, just stick with the formula for those books. And then when they asked me to start these kids' books, and I actually wrote Hoop, I wanted something that in my own mind would not be confused. I didn't want 9 and 10-year-old kids lining up with Striptease going, hey, show and tell. I got another Carl Hiaasen book, Mrs. Smith. Can I read this to the class? And then they read the lint scene, and I'm in jail the next day. So I wanted to make that distinction. The other thing that I do is on the kids' novels, I don't mention anywhere. In the front of the book, you usually list everything the author has written. I don't list any of the grown-up books. Not that I'm old-fashioned, but I am sensitive about it. My oldest son didn't really start reading those books till he was 13 or 14. My stepson, the same thing. My young son is not going to read them either until he's at least 14 years old. And it's just the language is not. I don't see any need to expose kids to that. Some of the grown-up situations are inexplicable even to grown-ups. So I trying to explain it to a teenager. I know they've probably heard everything on the school bus. I know they know more than I do probably about everything. But it's just, I was at a signing the other day, and I was, and there was about a 11 or 12-year-old girl, and she's standing in line with Star Island, and her mom's with her, and I said, "Is that for your mom?" She said, "No, that's for me." And I looked up at Mom and I said, "Yeah, man, that's a little young. You want to wait a little while to do that." And oh no, she's read all the other ones. And I don't know what to do. I don't want to harass or harangue the parents, but to me, I wouldn't lie to you. It bothers me. I don't, I know how unwell I am deep at the core. Why? It was like when they asked me to start writing these kids' books. I tell people the story is absolutely true. This editor calls up and says, "You ever thought about writing for kids?" And I said, "You have never read a word I've written, have you?" Or secondarily, you can't possibly have children of your own. Why would you let me write for kids? And I'm glad they talked me into it. But at the time, I thought, "Wow, no way." That's a good question. Is there a different process between writing for kids and writing for grown-ups? They're very different, but the voice is very similar. With the kids' novels, I'm writing the sort of the heroes and heroines are kids, they're teenagers, 11, 12, 13-year-olds. And I'm seeing the world through their eyes, and it doesn't, as my wife points out, I've never advanced intellectually past adolescence anyway, so it's not a big reach for me to go back to that age. and do that. The voice is the same. They're smart-ass novels. They make fun of grown-ups, which I've been doing my whole life in journalism. So it wasn't as big of a reach as I thought. The plots are a little tighter for kids because the characters that are young, that age, don't come into the story with as much baggage as my grown-up character like Chemo or Skink or even Bang Abbott or somebody where there's backstory that has to be done to explain how they ended up this way. With kids, you've got a kind of a clean slate, and you don't have that, so the plot can get off on faster footing. I mean, it's nice to write a novel where the main character doesn't have 5 divorces to explain, I mean, but the process of writing, once I get going, is pretty much the same. I mean, it's still, you're just storytelling, and you're trying to do it in a way that makes the kids laugh and still write about something sort of important to you. Both. I mean, some of them are invented out of just pure, the frightening imagination. Some of them, I clip a lot of news stories out of the newspapers, and I put them in files. I'll see something that'll appeal to me, and I'll say, I have to get that into a novel somehow, and I'll work it in. So a little bit of both. I do a fair amount of poaching. There was a novel I wrote called Skinny Dip, in which there was a character named Tool who is addicted to the drug fentanyl, which is a heavy-duty narcotic that comes in patch form. It's often for post-op patients or for critically ill patients. And in the novel, he breaks into nursing homes and medical facilities, and while these people, he peels off the patches and sticks them on his own body and runs away. That was based on a real thing that was happening in Miami. There was a guy, again, when that book came out and I was dead to do the publicity, people would say, that's the sickest thing you've ever thought up. And I'd say, wait a minute, let me just get you this clip and read to you. There was a guy who was putting on scrubs and going in and stealing the fentanyl patches off these poor people and just slapping them on and running out of the facilities. And so that kind of thing, naturally, I'm going to jump on it. I mean, that's just too good to be, or too bad to be true, I should say. But the main characters tend to be more conglomerates. There's in a book I did called Stormy Weather, there's a guy who was juggling human skulls, for example. Now, he had a collection of human skulls. Well, I have a friend who has a collection of human skulls. I didn't know, for example, that you're really not supposed to keep human skulls. I found out. I guess you have to explain the skulls at some point. But, I mean, these were mostly medical samples, I think, is what he told me. Anyway, but he didn't really juggle them. But he used them as bookends in his house, like for Thomas Mann and heavy duty stuff like that. And so I just took it one step further and had him juggling them. But that's kind of how it works. You take something and you kind of run with it a little bit like that. It's basically how it occurs to me. And almost every novel, there's something that was inspired by something that I stole out of the newspaper. I'm not going to lie to you. Well, I mean, the book business, I'll be honest with you, after 9/11, the fiction market took a hit. Nonfiction did okay, it's kind of held up, but the fiction market took a hit. The publishers aren't, the tours, I still go on tours, but a lot of writers don't anymore. And so when I'm whining like I am, like a child most of the book tour, I have to keep in mind that most writers would trade places in a second to be out on the tour. But I think the whole economy of the book business has changed. E-books is changing everything. So I don't think necessarily for the bad. I worry about bookstores. I worry about the bookstore experience, which is so great and so very American, really, to go and browse in a great old bookstore and just stay there for hours looking at stuff. If everybody's ordering their books online as an e-book or even as just ordering online, it endangers the livelihoods of a lot of, and it has. A lot of independent stores have closed since I started writing. A lot have. And some chains even have gone out of business. And I don't know the future of that. I know that they tell me that people who buy Kindles and Nooks and things like that, and the Apple thing, that they actually end up buying more books, purchasing more books online than they would in a store. In other words, it's such an easy process that they'll buy 3 or 4 novels at a time, bang, 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 and store them. And that's a good thing. Anything that gets people reading, especially kids now too, is a good thing. But I don't know. I worry about the bookstores because I think it's such a great part of our tradition and our culture. And I would be sad if the bookstores all became electronic outlets, I think. But like the newspaper business, magazine business. The only segment as I said, of journalism, of my business that's grown at all is the celebrity news. Everything else has shrunk, everything. They have fewer reporters covering the Pentagon now than at any time since 1960, probably 65 maybe, when the war kicked in. Do I do this particular talk? No. No, in many states there's some laws that you have to. But I will go to schools and I chat with them about Hoot, for example. I do talk. They want to talk about the environment. They want to talk about endangered wildlife. And I tell them about the stories from my own childhood. Hoot was really just kind of ripped off of my own childhood with the owls. I do talk, but no, it's a much different talk. But it's more about reading and it. Oh yeah, I try to be funny because the kids kind of expect you to be funny, and they get sort of heavy stuff all day long. So I go in and I don't mind telling them the truth and silly things, stupid things I've done too. But a lot of them are interested in writing, which is very cool because I have a 10-year-old, so I know it's such a glorious moment to see him put down the iPod, the Wii throttles, the Xbox. The laptop and pick up a book and sit down and read. You're so grateful. You're so eternally grateful that they still read books. When you have all these distractions that I certainly didn't have when I was a kid, that you want to encourage it. You don't want, I just feel this obligation to try to keep them fired up. A lot of them are interested in writing and storytelling. And a lot of them keep journals that they want to share with you. It's a terrific experience. It's not it does renew one's faith because you think that they're so much smarter than I was at that age. They're so much more plugged in. That's a good question. Once I start a novel, do I finish it? Yeah, I do. And it's a newspaper thing. There's no writer's block in the world of newspaper. There's none. If you get writer's block, you get unemployment block. You're out the door. We want your column. I don't care if you're sick. I don't care if you have cramps. I don't care if you're moody, your girlfriend dumped you. I want the columns in by 3, period. You learn to write like that. So you sit down and you have the discipline to do it. I do a lot of editing, changing, rewriting. I do a lot of stuff like that. But I usually finish. I'll give you an example, which I haven't told anybody. I'm working on another book for kids right now. And in it is a character that had been in Star Island. But I have a great editor, Sonny Mehta, and he said, I just don't know that this character works. I don't know the character should be in this book. And we went over it, and I rewrote the character, and I labored, and I did this. I added backstory, added a couple scenes. At the end of it, he said, I don't think this character fits. And I always go with him. He's right. He's never been wrong. So I excise that character from. It's not easy to do. They leave tracks everywhere, every little scene they're in. I excised the character completely, but I kept the file. And so when I started in this new kids book, that character is going to be in that kids book. I liked the character. He was just in the wrong book. So now I moved him to another book. I think the question is, there's something about Florida that attracts all these writers. He mentioned Tom Corcoran and Tim Dorsey and Randy White. Randy Wayne White is a friend of mine. It really has become a magnet. Randy's been down there his whole life, and Tim too, in Key West. And I mean, it's a place that attracts writers, and it's a place that tends to keep writers there. It's so interesting in ways that are not always comfortable if you're trying to raise a family or keep a job or have your kids in school. But from a point of view of a journalist, where you want something new and exciting every day, and from a novelist where you're looking for material, you can't beat it. Stephen King is down there probably more than he's up in Maine right now. He is. He spends a lot of time. He's got a place down there. It's drawn a lot of writers. Tom Wolfe's new novel is set down in Miami. It's an irresistible kind of, and not just South Florida. North Florida has its own little vortex of weirdness. It's just there's stories there that don't happen anywhere else. And I know wait, I'll tell one story and I'll leave on this very sordid, disturbing note for you all. And I'm going to clean up this story. Before I left, my son, my oldest son, is at the Herald, and he emailed me. He goes, well, only in Florida. And here's the following headline. Are there kids here? Yes, there might be kids here. Also, I'll clean this up. This was the headline. Aventura man arrested for dating Great Dane named after supermodel. He was arrested for allegedly having a romance with his Great Dane, who he had named lovingly Christy Brinkley. I couldn't put that in a novel in a million years. In a million years, the editor would say, go away, take your medicine, and just talk to me later. That's what you're dealing with down there. You all have been terrific. I'll see you downstairs. Thank you.